Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here with you all and with Jesus. Tina asked me to do this talk a few months ago. She was visiting us in our family home, and she asked if I would come down and give a talk, and I said, yeah, of course, I would love to. And it was only a couple of weeks ago I looked at my notes and I realized that the talk was called A Call to Holiness, and I panicked. I'm sure I never heard Tina say that when she asked me to do the talk. And I started thinking up excuses about how I could get out of it, because I'm not holy. I wish I was, but I'm not. And I suppose then I started thinking about that, though, that the talk was called A Call to Holiness. And I am called to holiness. I want to be holy very much. I desire that. And so maybe I do have a few things to share about that struggle, about that desire to be holy that I think we all share, don't we? I suppose that's why we're all here in this big tent this morning when we could be in lots of other places. We're here because we want to learn how to become holy. We want to learn to be perfect like our Father is perfect. That's what Jesus asked us to be. It's not even an option, really, is it, for a Christian, for a Catholic? The idea of becoming holy, of becoming one with our Father. It's something every single one of us is called to. None of us are called to it any more than anyone else. We're all called to that. And I suppose the other thing I thought about with a real spirit of gratitude when I thought about this talk is just how blessed I've been in my life to have met so many people who are holy. People in this tent, in fact, who are much better qualified than me to give a talk on holiness. I've had so many encounters with holiness, glimpses of what holiness looks like, and those encounters always increase that desire I have to become holy like them. So, for those of you who don't know, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. And maybe could someone tell me when I'm near the end of my talk, because I've got no idea at all what direction this talk's going to go in. So someone keep me right if I'm going to go over the. So this work of Mary's Meals, I suppose, it's always hard to know where to start our story, and we don't have much time this morning, but maybe just to start this morning with a little story. When I was in my early 20s, a long time ago now, 24 years ago, my brother and I hatched a plan to make a little appeal for the people who were suffering in Bosnia at that time, the refugees there. And we did that. We took a holiday from our work. We were both salmon farmers, and we launched this little appeal. And I suppose thinking back on it now, there's probably two main reasons why we did that, I suppose, slightly surprising thing. One was that we'd been to Medjugorje many years before that as youngsters, and God had really poured out His grace in our lives in Medjugorje, transformed the lives of our family, I suppose, led my mum and dad to turn our home into Craig Lodge Family House of Prayer, which I think some of you here know. So we had that particular bond and link with the people of Bosnia, with the people of Medjugorje. So there was that desire within us to help those people when they were suffering in that terrible way. And I think the other reason, when I think about it now, was at that time in my life, I wasn't at peace. I was looking for something else. I was somebody who had always been blessed, I suppose, with a strong faith. As a teenager and then in my early 20s, I was someone who was saying my rosary every day and going to Mass and doing those things. But there was another big part of my life that wasn't a good life, that was mainly in the pub and not keeping very good company and not behaving in ways that would glorify God. And I knew within me that that's not what God wanted for me, that God didn't want part of me. He wanted all of me. And there was a restlessness in me, I suppose. And I probably couldn't have articulated it that way then, but thinking about it now, I think that's what was going on in me. But initially I just took this 1 week off work and I drove this Land Rover full of aid out to Bosnia, and I came back home after that thinking, done my good deed and it will be back to work as normal on the fish farm. But then I discovered when I got home that God had a completely different plan, because when I got home there was this mountain of food and clothing, all these things we'd asked for, carried on pouring into our home. And at that point I prayed about it and I decided to give up my job, and which wasn't a big sacrifice, by the way, and I sold my house, and somebody gave me a truck, and I just said to God, I'll carry on doing this as long as there's a need and as long as people keep giving. And I suppose in many ways that is the story of Mary's Meals all these years later, all these years when so many incredible things have happened and this work has grown in so many ways. People have kept giving. So many of you here who are part of this mission, and all over the world, people doing incredible things. And therefore the work has grown and grown. Those early years of driving the truck back and forward, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, but I learned a lot along the way. And it was a very blessed time for me, especially blessed because I met my wife, Julie, who was a nurse. I didn't know her at that time, and she phoned me to say, can I come and help you in Bosnia? And she explained how she had just woken one night she felt that God was calling her to give up her job and to go and help, even though she didn't know anyone in Bosnia. So I took her there, and with a priest friend of mine, we drove out, and it was very embarrassing because it soon turned out she was far better at driving trucks than I was. I kept on making all kinds of embarrassing mistakes, like the first time we drove out together to a hospital in Mostar that was under siege. It was being shelled, and it was quite a dramatic situation, and I drove up with this truckload of medicines all the way from Scotland, and I remember feeling quite proud and thinking, I hope Julie's going to be impressed by this. And I managed to drive right into the hospital. I misjudged the height of the truck, and I hit this canopy and put a big hole in the roof of the truck and in the hospital, as if they didn't have enough trouble already. So lots of kind of humiliating and embarrassing things were happening in those days, and lots of beautiful things too. I remember another occasion in another similar situation in a town that was being bombed and shelled at that time. And this time, my co-driver was my father. Different people used to come with me to look after me, and this time it was my dad. And we were delivering aid to this place where there were children with special needs, many children who needed constant support, who were in their cots, who couldn't walk. And it was a horrible situation. It was very terrifying for the people who were looking after those children, because the war was getting closer and they were being shelled, and it was very difficult for them to know how to move from that place with those children. And when we were actually unloading the truck, there were some explosions nearby, and I was very scared. And we unloaded the food and the medicines and the things we'd brought, and I jumped in the truck ready to drive out of there as quickly as possible. I was kind of revving the engine, looking in my rear view mirror to see my dad giving big hugs to all the nurses there, and speaking to them and encouraging them. And I was thinking, come on, Dad, we just need to get out of here. And for those of you who know my dad, that's probably not a difficult image to conjure up of him doing that hugging when we should have been hitting the road. And I remember thinking that many years later, after Pope Francis became Pope, he talked one time about the sin of efficiency, about the danger of those of us who do these good works, that we get caught up in doing things efficiently. You know, we get caught up in the planning of them, and we forget that they're a work of love. You know, and for them to be a work of love means that we have to spend time with people. It's about relationship, loving relationships more than anything else, you know. And I suppose when I was thinking about this talk and about the call to holiness, what was coming to me more than anything else was fatherhood. God as our Father, as our loving Father, and that image, you know, of my Father. And I know, you know, maybe we're not all blessed in the same ways that our earthly fathers can love us in that way, that demonstrative way. I'm blessed to have had a father like that, but we're all blessed to have God as our Father. You know that, and I think when I think about how to become more holy, that thing that I desire, for me that's key about how we more deeply understand and accept God as our Father, not as a distant God or a demanding God or a God that judges us without loving us more than any earthly father ever could. A God that just wants to hug us and be our Father. A God that really wants to make us family, you know. And when I see people who are really holy, I think that's more than anything what they've done. They've developed a deep understanding that they really are children of God and loved in that way. And I suppose when that happens in people's lives, when you really have a deep understanding that you are a child, a loved child of God, then it changes your relationship with everyone else round about you too, because then they are really your brothers and sisters, and you love them in a different way too. And I suppose that's what I see over and over again when I see holy people in lots of different situations, not always people who are doing dramatic things, that they are people who love. They are people who choose to love in every circumstance. Because I don't think there's any situation we can ever find ourselves in life where we can't choose to love. And, you know, that love that I'm talking about is not the kind of love sometimes we hear so often about in the world, you know, a love that's all about emotion. I'm talking about more about love as a virtue, something that we can, with God's help, train ourselves in, to choose love, a practical love, a love that really genuinely puts the other person first. So that's what I see often when I meet people who are holy. So back to the story. So the work carried on growing, driving trucks of aid to Bosnia, and then we started getting invited to other places like Romania. In Romania, we started helping children who were HIV positive and who'd been abandoned by their parents. And initially we were trying to help them in their hospital wards, these terrible places. Children who were 11, 12 years old who couldn't walk because nobody had ever lifted them out of their cots for long enough for them to learn. And we started building homes there with these beautiful Romanian friends of ours, people with a very profound faith. And we opened 3 homes and we took all those children out. And I remember the doctors in that place, some of them could see no worth in those children. They used to say to us, I don't know why you're bothering with those children. They used to say to us, those children will have died before you even build those homes of yours. So here we are all these years later. I know many of those children who are now young adults. 3 of them are now married with their own children. And again, just that project, that experience of how God's love can really transform lives, really helped me and encouraged me to go on in this work. So the work grew, and then this work that eventually became Mary's Meals, this thing that we do today, was born in 2002. It was a year of famine in Malawi, in Southeast Africa, and we were working there for the first time. And I was working with a parish priest in an area where many people were starving, and we were taking food into his villages. And one day he said to me, I'm going to visit someone who's sick at home. She's dying, in fact, and her husband's died already. Would you like to come with me? So I went with them, and we went into this small home. And Emma, who was the mother who was dying, was lying on the floor, and she had her 6 children around her. And she said to us, you know, there's nothing left now except to pray that somebody will look after my children when I'm gone. And then I started talking to our oldest child beside her, and he was called Edward, and he was about 14 years of age. And at one point in the conversation, I asked Edward, what are your hopes? What are your ambitions? And he looked at me and he said, I would like to have enough food to eat, and I would like to be able to go to school one day. And that was it. That was the extent of Edward's ambition of 14 years of age. And in many ways, this work of Mary's Meals is a response to the words of that child. The work of Mary's Meals is simply about providing one good meal every day in a place of education for children like that, for the poorest children in the world, so that we meet their immediate need for food, but at the same time we serve it in a way that enables them to come into the classroom where they can gain an education that, please God, can set them free from poverty. It's a very simple, practical work. And I don't think it's an insignificant thing that this work was really a response to the words of a child. It wasn't a work that was sat down and planned in some office or some development experts. It was a response to the words of a child, people who listened to what that child had to say and responded in love, lots and lots of people. So we began that work of Mary's Meals that year, 2002, served the first meals then, and to about 200 children, and then it just began growing. It worked. We could see it work. Children who'd never been to school before began coming in that first school into the classroom for the first time because of the promise of a meal. And all those meals, by the way, then and now, are cooked and served by local volunteers, people living in terrible poverty themselves, who are choosing to take part in this work of love, choosing to give up their time to cook and serve for the poorest children in their communities. And so the work began to grow. After that first school, the next village came to us and said, can we have Mary's Meals as well, please? And so it went on and on. And as you heard, I think in the introduction, that today Mary's Meals is feeding nearly 1.2 million children every day. And it's just this thing that never ever ceases to surprise me with its beauty in so many different ways, you know, especially in the ways people respond to this call all over the world, people doing amazing things, amazing acts of love. I always like to say that when I'm talking about Mary's Meals, that it's not something that depends on anyone doing anything spectacular. None of us are doing anything spectacular. Many of us who have been asked to lead this work feel a lot of the time very inadequate and mystified as to why we've been called to do this. But what I see is that Mary's Meals is really just lots and lots and lots of little acts of love, little sacrifices all over the world. Many people choosing Mary's Meals as a way for them to love their neighbour, as a way for them to express their faith. And lots of other people who aren't Catholic, who aren't Christian, taking part in this universal mission too. And that's another beautiful part of the world, because very often that brings people to know God too. This work that's done in the name of our Blessed Mother, Mary's Meals. People of no faith or different faiths, it leads them to ask that question, who's she then? Very often when I'm giving talks in other kinds of settings and environments, I'll talk about the mechanics of the work and the simplicity of the work, and I won't perhaps initially explain why it's called Mary's Meals. And so often people will say, who's Mary? Is that your mum? Is that your wife? And it's wonderful to be able to say, no, it's Mary, the mother of Jesus, and to start talking to them about who she is and about who Jesus is. So I thank God for this work and this opportunity it gives me in so many ways to try to walk that path of holiness. But I would say also, that's one part of my life, that call to Mary's Meals and to lead this work. There's another part of my life that's more important, I would say, also in my path of trying to grow closer to God, and that's my call as husband and father. So this isn't work of Mary's Meals, isn't about me running around the world and forgetting about my wife and 7 children. They are first for me in my vocation. And I suppose, when I think about that call to holiness, again, it can be really hard at times. I'm sure many of you share that who are married with kids and young kids, especially if you have that notion of holiness about being pious in a particular way and having lots of chance for quiet, contemplative prayer. That's very hard to do when you've got 7 kids running about. Our house is completely mental, it's mad, it's not a place where you can very easily get that kind of prayer. So it's really important to find other ways to pray. That thing I talked about at the beginning, more than anything, this call to holiness is that thing about relationship with God. So how do we continue to have that relationship with God? How do we do that in amongst that busyness and chaos and noise? And it made me think a little bit about, I noticed when I was growing up, I was very close with my brothers, and then we all left home and did different things. And we were very bad at figuring out a routine of phoning each other. We never really did a good job of making that transition in relationship, realizing we're not just going to bump into each other every day and chat, so we better start phoning each other. And we didn't do a very good job of that. And I'm thinking about that now. My oldest son is leaving home and trying to do a better job of that, of actually building in a routine of calling him at particular times so that it happens. And I was thinking that about prayer as well. I think for me that is one of the most important things that we can do, is have a faithfulness in prayer, a discipline in prayer, even if it doesn't seem like a lot. So for me in my daily life, I always, when I'm at home, will pray with my kids before school. I'll always try to read scripture with them before school. I love that, actually, the children's Bibles and the Bible stories. That's my level. I kind of tune into that. We have great chats about those Bible stories before school. And then in the evenings we say our rosary together. We're not always in the same house at the same time, but whoever is at home that evening, we'll sit down and say the rosary together. And I think that's, I'm running out of time, but that's one of the most important things I feel for all of us, is that faithfulness, and trying to figure out what works for you in your life, and also the other thing I would say is that I think is so important is not to give up. That's the big temptation for all of us, is because whenever we set out in the path of holiness, we fall flat on our faces very quickly. I do anyway, over and over again, and it gets really tiresome. You get so demoralized often. Talking personally, again, I do anyway. And I think it's so important that we don't give up, that we don't think this is impossible. And those times when we mess up, we see them as opportunities to realize even more than we did before that we are completely dependent on God. This project of holiness, it's His more than it's ours. He's the one that's going to make us holy. And every time we set off trying to do it ourselves, we mess up again and fail. And that's okay. That happens. It's okay as long as we don't give up. I think St. Paul says, hope I've got this right, it's in a letter to the Hebrews, to run with perseverance the race that is marked for us. And I love that line because, it tells us that the race is marked for us. Each of us have a race to run. And everyone is different. Every one of us is different. Something else I noticed about holy people, by the way, they're all completely different. We're all called to become more who God made us to be when we're called to be holy. It doesn't mean we all end up being the same. We all end up being very different. So we've all got a different race to run, but we're all called to it. That we're all, every one of us in this tent is called to be holy. And imagine if all of us in this tent became holy. I've no doubt that the whole world would be changed, and changed forever, if just the people in this tent became holy. The world would be transformed. So I just thank you for this chance to be with you this morning. And I just, let's pray for each other as we all renew our commitment to run that race with perseverance, to run it to the end, that we help each other. It's not that other kind of race. We're not racing against each other. It's not a competition. We're running together, and we're helping each other get to the end of it, get to heaven. So I'll see you there, if not before. Thank you.